You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
African consumers are not Western consumers. That can sound like a very glib statement. There were some things about the African consumers that were not just you, but they were significant enough for them to be taken into consideration. Data is not enough. You have to look at the context within the data, because you can just look at the data and say, oh, all our products are good, let's go ahead. And then you would be wrong. And so we developed this tool that now helps to understand target consumers in particular. The primary demographic driving the growth of the African middle class is actually the female demographic.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have a special guest, Feyi Olubodun, who is an author, also founder and managing partner at Open Square Consulting. Welcome to the podcast, Feyi. How are you?
Doing fine, Tessa. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm genuinely very excited about today's conversation as I've just finished reading your book. The book is packed with amazing pieces of insight, which I'm sure we'll discuss during our conversation today.
Awesome.
Before we get started, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about who Feyi is?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tessa. So, I'm a business leader with about 2 decades experience. Almost 10 of that has been at director level, C-level. And I've been largely in the marketing space. I've done literally every part of marketing that you can imagine. And in the years of my experience, I've worked in a research company, which was part of the ETK Group. And then I've gone on to work in an agency for about 10 years, where I left as CEO and then eventually set up Open Squares Africa, the consulting practice firm that we've been running for the past few years. And then along the line, I then wrote the book on the African consumer, the villager, how Africans consume brands.
Thank you for that introduction regarding your journey to obviously starting the company, which is Open Square, and your book, which I'm excited to discuss. So, from the perspective of a business owner, what do you need to know about the African consumer?
As you can guess, that's my favorite topic of all time. So, I think that one of the first things that a business owner needs to know, it's so obvious you can miss it, and it's the fact that African consumers are not Westerners. They are not Western consumers. They are already, and that can sound like a very glib statement, but
Yes.
Too many business owners literally ignore that. And when they come into the market, they come in with this idea that the way we do business in the West, or the way business is done in the West, is how we should do it in Africa. And they get surprised all the time. And they see players in the market who are not thinking or operating like them. Those players are doing well. They are performing. They are growing their consumer base. And the trick is you have to keep in mind that the African consumer is not a Westerner. Yes, they are exposed to Western trends, technology, and innovation. Yes, they are active on social media. Yes, they do all kinds of stuff based on globalization. But they are essentially deep inside. They are not Western consumers. And you have to make the effort to get to see them as they really are, not as you think they should be. And that for me is the biggest shift that needs to happen for business owners to really get a grasp of the market.
Thank you for that. So you've touched upon the nuance of the African consumer, and also African consumers are not the same as Western consumers, which is something that you've discussed in your book. If we can look into aspects of your book, you recently published The Villager, How Africans Consume Brands. What was the reason for writing the book, and what areas of African consumers did you look at and why?
Thanks for that. What motivated me to write the book, it's not a single event, it was a series of events, right? Over a period of time when I began to observe that some businesses will come into the market with their products and their brands and they'll succeed. Some will come in and despite having innovative products and all of that, they wouldn't succeed.
Yes.
And so I began to study that what's going on. Some of the businesses that didn't succeed, especially on the consumer front, B2C businesses, the products were great. So that began to trouble me. And then I began to study that over a period of years. At least I spent 5 to 7 years studying that through my career.
Oh, wow.
And then I observed certain patterns and certain nuances that made it clear that there were some things about the African consumers that were not just unique, but they were significant enough for them to be taken into consideration. And the areas that I looked at, that I saw where the differences lie, were largely cultural areas and psychographical areas. Demographics, right? With everyone in the world knows all the demographics about Africa, knows all the demographics about the countries. It's out there. But the demographics and the actual behavior of the people, there's often a wide gap. It would be wrong to assume that a 15-year-old African youth will behave the same way as a 15-year-old American youth, for instance. The demographics are the same, but it's on the cultural and the psychographic level that the change occurred. I'll tell you a short anecdote. I remember many years ago conducting some product tests for a client then. I think I talk about this in the book. And we went to a city in southwestern Nigeria called Ibadan. It was one of the locations. And so when we were analyzing the data, of course, we put 3 formulations for the consumers to test. And we, as the partners to the client, we knew the formulation that was really good. We knew the one that was really bad. And then we knew the one that was average, right? We were the ones that put the products there. And then I noticed that all the consumers in Ibadan said, without exception, that the products were equally good. And this was shocking because I knew the products were not equally good. I knew that. And everyone else in the other locations, reflected some of these differences. And then it occurred to me that I was bumping into a cultural lens, right? And the lens I was bumping into is that the Ibadan people, they are very diplomatic people. And because they are very diplomatic, they would rather give you a false yes than to give you an absolute no. They don't want to hurt your feelings.
Interesting.
And then what really happened at the site, the venue of the test, was that the consumers basically went. I normally tell this story in Yoruba, but I'll keep it to the English. But they basically went and said, look, they gave us free products the first time, the second time, the third time. It would be rude for us to say one of these products is bad. So they basically said all the products are equally good. And so the only way we could manage that data was to discount the value for that location so that the data could make sense to the client. And it's experiences like that makes me say things like data is not enough. You have to look at the context within the data, because you can just look at the data and say, oh, wow, all our products are good, let's go ahead. And then you would be wrong, completely wrong, because you've missed the context. So I looked at the aspects like the cultural aspects, the psychographic aspect, and then ultimately from that developed a framework for the psychology of the African consumer, which I fondly call the villager, explaining that the village is not a physical location, it's a psychological construct that defines the mindset of the African consumer.
Interesting. Thank you for that insight. So you touched upon what motivated you to write the book, your observations of people's success and failures, also the aspect of cultural nuances of customer behavior. And it took you 7 years to put this book together. From my understanding, to put the book together would have required a lot of work gathering data and intelligence. I was hoping you could go into a bit more detail. How did you go about gathering this data and intelligence to put the book together?
Initially, in fact, the data gathering is still going on, actually, and I'll talk about that because I'm in the process of working on the sequel to the book.
Fantastic.
initially it was largely qualitative, gathering observations from as I worked on different projects across different industries and categories across Africa. At some point in my career, I'd done work in Nigeria, in Ghana, in South Africa. I'd had a bit of exposure as well to East Africa. And then also had a short stint in North Africa, in Morocco, just for a few days. And in all of those, across all of those periods and projects, I began to sort of gather qualitative evidence based on observations, some of them based on actual data that came from projects that were done for clients and all of that. And then began to sort of look at that and analyze that and synthesize all of the insights from that, from all of this data over time. That was how the framework emerged, because it was a case of what were the things that were consistent, that no matter which part of the country or the continent that I went to, these particular trends came up, they came out all the time. They were consistent all the time. And that was sort of how I put it together. And then post the publication of the book, what we've then done was to take it a step further, 2 steps further actually. One was around the time we published the book, we then validated all our insights and the framework for it in an academic manner, took it through a reliability and validity test. We've since then developed a quantitative survey tool that we now use in our work for our clients, which allows us to quantify the framework or the mindset of a particular target segment. And the reason we developed that is a lot of clients will come and say, well, we've read your book, we've been introduced to the framework, but what you presented there is likely qualitative. We have, and it's a bit generic in application, but we have this particular target segment of consumers. Is there a way you could help us understand them in particular? And so we developed this tool that now helps to understand target consumers in particular in relation to the framework. It's sort of, we're lensing businesses to say, look, you have a Western lens, we can help you take it off. This is another lens you could use. It's a quantitative lens, it's numbers-based. It's not guesstimates. There's analysis, there's science behind it, and this is what it says. So that's sort of how the data gathering came about, and it's as a consequence of all of the additional data we've now gathered since the publication of the book that one is now working on putting together a sequel to the book. The working title is The Village Map, which will be out in the next year or so.
Oh, brilliant. I'm looking forward to reading that sequel. You've beautifully detailed how you gathered information and intelligence for the book. I know from my experience, when gathering information and intelligence, you usually have an end outcome in mind or a target person that you'd like to gain value from the information. What type of person was the book intended for?
It was really intended for chief execs, marketing and strategy execs, and business owners, especially founders, people who are doing cutting-edge stuff on the continent, fintech business owners, and all of that. And the reason it's targeted at them is that at the end of the day, after you've done your strategy, you've raised the capital for your business, you put your team together, you still have to take a product or a service to the market. And that's sort of the last mile. And if your consumers you're going after, if they don't uptake your product, if they don't transact with your business through your product, then at the end, the business fails. The business does not take off, right? And at that point, you really, really need to understand the consumers and know what behaviors you need to lever, what levers you need to pull in order to get them to transact with you, in order to get them to take your products and use them repeatedly and all of that. If you don't know that, then you hit an invisible wall, which is coming really from what you don't know. It's really a case of what you don't know could kill you quite literally. So those are the people that it's meant for. It's meant to help them to look at their businesses, at their markets differently, and tailor what they are offering, how their route to market, their market entry approach, and all of that, and tailor it in a way that fits the exact market they're going after.
Thank you for that. So you explain how the book is or was intended for chief executives and business owners of indigenous and international companies. So if we kind of look at the international company aspect, from my experience, when international companies enter the African market, they're always trying to chase the African middle class, which has almost become some kind of mythical demographic. What are some of the facts and truths that people aren't aware of regarding the African middle class?
Thank you for that. See, everyone chases the African middle class because they want to quickly get some return on investment, right?
Yes.
And when you look at the demographic and you look at the economic numbers, the macroeconomics, you see that these guys have got some decent income that you can then sell to. There are several things that are often left out of that conversation. The most obvious one is the fact that the same middle class, everyone is targeting the middle class. The second one is that Africa today, to a large extent, is still the bottom of the pyramid market, to a large extent.
Okay. So what does that mean?
So, for instance, if you look at a country like Nigeria, the most populous country on the continent, you have, if we use upper, middle, lower class, which can either, if you use the ABCD or the LSM, whichever one, the upper class in Nigeria is about 5% at the most. It's about 5%. The middle class is about 25%. That's upper plus lower middle class. And then the remaining 70% of the population is the bottom of the pyramid, is the lower class.
Okay.
Right? If you look at that middle class, for instance, only 15% of the middle class are traveled once a year out of the country for holidays. Right? Only 15% of that middle class. Out of the 15% that travel out of the country, 75% of them go primarily to the UK. They don't go anywhere else, right? So you're talking of a very small number of consumers that are exposed internationally. And if you go to other parts of the continent, you see that similar dynamic. If you go farther down south of the continent to a place like South Africa and all of that, you see a bit more, the dynamic shifts a little, you have a bit more middle class and all of that. But the other factor in there is something that it's called the dependency index, which BMI research, which is now Fitch research, first came up with. And it's the fact that it's not the income of the middle class that matters, but how many people are dependent on the income. And if you look at the West, the dependency index in the West is about 1.5. That means if you're a middle class person in the West, you earn your income. It's just you. If you've got a family, your wife is probably working and all of that. Okay, she has her own income. You've got your own income, and then you have maybe one or two kids, and then you have the government taking care largely of everyone else in your extended family. Isn't that so? If you're in the US, you have the 401ks, you have retirement plans, you have retirement homes. So basically, you have this small family unit of 4 people with 2 adults earning income, and it's just 4 people depending on 2 income sources, right? That's the picture there. If you come to Africa, it's totally different. If you're a middle class person and you're earning income, your family depends on you, your extended family depends on you. On average, you will have at least 6 people depending on your income, on average, who that every month when your income comes in, you have to sort of disperse it and take care of them. You have people back home in your community of origin that you have to send money to and take care of. We have a name for them here. We call them CSR, Common Community Social Receivers, because they're just there to collect from you. So you have to give them. It's just, they call it black tax, but it doesn't sound as nice as CSR. So stop with CSR. You have to do that. You have parents that depend on you. You will most likely have at least 3 children in the house. If you have 3 children in Africa, because it's a communal environment, it's not an individualistic environment, you will then have an older member of the family who will come in to take care of the kids, right?
Yes.
In the UK or in the US, you can't afford to do that because just the cost of getting a babysitter is so ridiculous. You can't have a living babysitter. In Africa, you bring one cousin or you bring an auntie to come in and take care of the kids. So now you have 2 adults earning income, and then you have 4 dependents in the house, and you have like 2 or 3 other dependents outside the house in the family setting. So on the single income, the dependency index in Africa for the middle class is about 8. That's about, 6 times higher than the dependence index in the West. So what that means is that the real commercial value of the middle class African as a consumer to a business is way lower than the commercial value of a middle class in the West. So when everyone targets the middle class, they're targeting a middle class person whose disposable income is not as high as their counterparts in the Western countries, because those countries are individualistic in nature. There are systems and structures put in place by government to reduce individual dependence on others. It's not the same in Africa. You can't take your parents to an old parents' home in Africa. Yeah. You understand? There's going to be a family meeting. You are going to be called a wicked person. You're going to be demonized. You have to take care of your parents till they die. Do you hear stories about how they took care of you? It can be quite dramatic. I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yes.
So when the middle class is targeted, that critical element is often missed out. And so everyone is trying to milk the middle class consumer, but his purchasing power is not as strong as that of his Western counterpart. Whereas businesses should look more to the bottom of the pyramid and think about how can we structure our products and services in a way that they become accessible to bottom of the pyramid consumers, where the volume is bigger, the transaction value per person is lower, yes, but the volume in terms of number is bigger, and you can capture more value if you can create a high volume offering for that segment of the market.
That's extremely interesting. Thank you for that deep insight there. I guess unless you're doing the work that you're doing, you probably wouldn't be aware of that insight. Thank you for detailing the facts and truths of the African middle class and why businesses should be targeting people at the bottom of the pyramid. Leading on from there, obviously if we stick to the theme of the African middle class, we always hear or read quote headlines and statistics about Africa's growing middle class. From your point of view, how fast is Africa's middle class actually growing?
From our point of view here, it's actually been growing steadily. Couldn't put a number off the top of my head to it now, but I mean, at the minimum, we're seeing a 15 to 20% growth steadily. Well, what is interesting about the growth, though, which is also an important factor, is that the primary demographic driving the growth of the African middle class is actually the female demographic.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having more and more females getting empowered and joining the middle class. They're getting more higher paying jobs. But part of what is stimulating that, by the way, is also the tech industry, the booming tech industry in Africa. Because tech knows no gender barriers, right?
Yeah.
It's if you can program, if you can code, if you can run a program, if you can do anything. It doesn't care. If you can do it, you can do it, right? And so that's because most tech jobs are high paying jobs, right? Today, tech companies are the oil and gas companies of today. Back in the day, if you wanted to get a job, everyone wanted to get to oil and gas.
Yes.
Today everyone wants to get into tech because the salaries are significantly higher than most other industries, and so on and so forth. So what that has done is that it has stimulated a surge in the middle class. We have more females driving that growth. We have a higher percentage of females driving the growth, unlike before. In fact, the statistics show that where you have the most, the closest form of gender balance in terms of economic empowerment is actually in the middle class in Africa as at today. It's not the same at the upper class, not the same at the bottom of the pyramid, but in the middle class, we're seeing that gender normalize it. It's been closed rather steadily. And that's fascinating because while I did say earlier that you should think of bottom of the pyramid, I would also say, to balance that out, that companies that have products that are targeted at females should think of going after the middle class. The reason is that most of the females that not only are the females getting into the middle class, the females have a higher dependency, they have a lower dependency income index than the men in the middle class, and therefore they have more disposable income. The reason for that is a cultural reason. As much as equality and all of that is being advanced at different parts of the continent to varying degrees of success, the general belief is still, and the general behavior is still, that women still depend on men for a lot of their basic needs. If you have a middle-class male and a middle-class female earning the same amount of money, if they happen to be related in any way, most of the basic needs of the middle-class female will typically be borne by the middle-class male. So what that translates to is that the middle-class female will then have more disposable income than the middle-class male who is earning the same amount of income. I don't know if you're following me.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So what that then means is, if you are a manufacturer, a business owner, a multinational company, and you've got products that are targeted at females, you should definitely go for the middle-class female, because she has way more disposable income than a male middle-class counterpart, or even a bottom of the pyramid female. You understand? She has way more disposable income. If you have products that are targeted at her, especially luxury products or fashion and accessory products, or female hygiene or beauty products, you should definitely target them at the middle-class female. They are a rich market, they are a ripe market, and it's a market where spending is discretionary. It's not based on logic, it's based on emotion. And once they connect emotionally with any product, they tend to move quickly to loyalty with that product. So just to say that, to balance out the need to emphasize bottom of the pyramid, it doesn't mean that you should throw away the middle class completely. You just have to know where to go when it comes to the middle class.
Fantastic. So you touched on how the female demographic is driving middle class growth in Africa, and that businesses should attempt to target that demographic. So if we kind of look at how brands are working in Africa, or when they try to get into the African market, why do you think brands, both global and local, often fail to connect with the African consumer?
Yeah, I think what I've seen that is most common is, especially multinational businesses, they come in, they've got templates, and they've already designed a marketing template of some sort on how they are going to reach consumers. And then they just want to roll out that template exactly without giving room for adaptation, or sometimes developing the template from the ground up. I've seen marketing templates and business strategy templates that were developed by people who have never been to Africa, and who don't know anything about the continent, and they don't have counterparts that they can feed from. I remember some years ago working with a client where the global head of strategy and marketing, or something like that, for a product for Africa, was someone who was sitting in the US and had never been to Africa at all.
Interesting.
And that was designing and defining how things should be done on the continent. And I'm like, why won't this person just get on a plane and come for an immersion? Come to the couple of countries that they're your focus countries, and just come and see what really is happening there, and all of that. And I think that unwillingness sometimes to adapt to the market, and sometimes it's not out of incompetence or stuff like that. Sometimes it's usually structural. There are organizational policies in place that make it difficult for such adaptations to happen. It's why some of those things don't really work and why they fail to connect. And what I always advise clients whenever I get to speak to them is, look, there are people on the continent that understand the continent, that can help you to understand the continent, that can help you to develop and design the stuff you're doing in a way that is suited to the continent. The way I always put it is that if you want to travel through any terrain, geographical terrain this time, you need a compass and you need a map. A compass is universal. North is north, wherever you are in the world, right?
True.
A map, however, is terrain specific. And if all you have is a compass, you'll have a general direction, but then you struggle while you're navigating through the terrain that you're in. So I always say that clients, yes, should have a compass. Their compass will be their general guidelines as to what they are pursuing, their business objectives, what their marketing objectives are, what success looks like for them, and so on and so forth. But then they need a map that sort of guides them through the specific terrain so that they can navigate through the different nuances and opportunities that are available in the different markets they are going to, so they can achieve their overall objective and their overall goal. So that's sort of, and that's why, even the toolkit that we use for clients, we call it the village map, because what it does is it provides the map to the compass of the client. The clients should have compass, businesses should have compasses. They should be able to say, this is what we want to achieve, this is where we're going. But then they need a map to sort of succeed in the market. When they don't have a map, following to extend my illustration a bit, and all they have is a compass. Oh, this is how we do it in Atlanta. You do this way, you do this that way, you do this that way. And then they just go ahead with that, they fail. If I may share an anecdote very quickly. Some years ago, this is a very old story. A lot of car manufacturers, American car manufacturers, were trying to penetrate China, and they didn't succeed. American and European car manufacturers,
yes,
they didn't succeed. They struggled for a long time, and it was Audi that first cracked what the nuance was when they took the Audi A8L, which is a very long, it's an extra long sedan that they've got, and they took that to China, and that product took off immediately. And when they investigated why that product worked, it was simply because the car owner or the chief exec or the billionaire who is sitting in the back of the car feels that it is a disrespect for him to sit in the car at such a close distance to his driver, who is economically inferior to him. And all of the Americans tried to launch mid-sized sedans in China. And in China, power distance is very huge. The power distance in China, according to the Hofstadter scale, is about 90 over 100. They have one of the highest power distances in the world. So that nuance was what Audi stumbled on when they brought an extra long sedan that gave the owner of the car some comfort and some sense of power, that there was enough physical distance when I sit in this car between me and my driver. So the driver continues to be reminded symbolically that I am still his boss. Now, that's a cultural nuance. In the US, nobody cares about that. Billionaires in the US can sit in the front, the passenger seat, with their drivers in the front, isn't it? It doesn't matter to them because power distance is lower. I'm sure it's the same in Europe. Power distance is lower. But if you look at places like Africa, if you look at places like Asia, power distance is significantly bigger. And that's a factor that can affect product design, can affect product launch, can affect routes to market.
You've raised some extremely interesting points there. Some points that I guess people don't often consider. And you also kind of mentioned how companies wanting to enter Africa should have an African strategy that is specific for the African market in order to connect with African consumers. So I'm right in saying, obviously, using the right type of communication is key to connecting to African consumers. With that in mind, how do companies go about developing a world-class, say, marketing communication strategy for the African market?
Well, typically what is done is most companies take the communication strategy that has worked elsewhere, and in some cases they do very minimal work and just replace images with African images, and of course it never works. Sometimes they project because they've heard that Africans are aspirational. They then project to the Africans what they think an image of success in the West looks like, and therefore what they think the Africans should aspire to. What we recommend that is best is you have to develop a communication strategy that has 3 to 5 critical elements. In our practice, we call this the recipe model, but it's not spelled recipe as the food. It's spelled RECEEPE, which is an acronym for 5 things that you must do if you're going to develop any marketing innovation intervention or program that you want to use to engage your consumers. And all of this is tied to who the African consumer is inside. And we say that, number one, your communication, in this case, that's what we're talking about, has to recognize people, your target consumers, for who they really are, as they are. Don't try to educate them. Don't try to change them. Don't try to make them into what they are not. Recognize them for who they are. So, for instance, AB InBev launched Hero Lager beer some years ago in Nigeria, and they launched it in the Southeast. They launched it in the Southeast on the birthday of one of their biggest heroes in the Southwest. They launched it there, and they put the Biafra flag on the bottle label, and they launched it on Ojuku's birthday and all of that, on his anniversary and everything. And now, most companies would not want to do that. They would say, okay, this is a sensitive issue, let's not touch it. But AB InBev went ahead and did that. And what happened was that the brand connected so strongly with the Southeasterners that within 3 to 4 years, that brand had taken 10% market share in the entire lager category in Nigeria. It is the fastest growing brand in the past 10 years in the history of the lager category in Nigeria. And it was because they came and accepted the consumers for who they are. The Southeasterners in Nigeria, the Igbo people, they believe in Ojukwu, they believe in Biafra. We are going to launch a brand for that. In fact, the streets on which the first bar that Hero Lager beer was sold was renamed to Hero Street, right?
Okay.
That's crazy. That's wild. But it worked, and it has continued to work even till now. So we say recognize who the people are. That's the RE there. So their core identity, not your perception of them. Secondly, you celebrate where they've come from. That's their journey. What is their journey like? What is their life story like? You've got to speak to their life story. You've got to speak to where they're coming from. Number 3, you have to enable them to be who they want to be. What is their ambition? You cannot define their ambition for them. You have to discover it and then help them to become that. Number 4, you then have to empower them to go where they want to go, their aspiration. So one is enabling them to be who they want to be. That's their ambition. The other is empowering them to go where they want to go. That's their aspiration. And that could be a physical location for them. It could be a state of life for them. And lastly, you have to celebrate the people they are traveling with. And by that, we mean the functional tribe, not their tribe of origin, but the tribe that they identify with the most in their journey through life. You have to map out who their core functional tribe is and how you celebrate that tribe as the same way you're celebrating them. The reason for that is that Africans are communal. We are not individualistic. If you do marketing communication pieces that shows an individual and that focuses as an individual, it doesn't work as much as marketing communication that focuses on the individual and their tribe that they are journeying through life with. It's not as powerful in general. So we always recommend that these are the 5 levers that you must pull if you're going to design an impactful marketing intervention or program, be it a marketing communication campaign, be it an activation program in trade or with consumers, or whatnot. These are the 5 levers you've got to pull. What we then do to help clients is we then help them to identify which of these 5 levers are the top 2 for their target segment that they should focus on. Because obviously there are budget constraints and all of that. You can't do everything. So it's critical to understand the ones that are strongest for your own target consumer, and then you leverage that.
Brilliant. So you touched upon how people or companies should recognize and accept African consumers for who they are and not make assumptions.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, what are some of the myths or assumptions that you'd like to dispel about the African consumer?
Yeah. The first one I'd like to dispel is that the fact that African consumers are digital, they're very active digitally, does not equate to them being completely westernized. I love how a friend of mine puts it, GGR Kokus, who also does the same kind of work I do in South Africa. He puts it this way: the Africans are westernizing. Africans are modernizing, not westernizing. They're modernizing, not westernizing. So the Vaki Foundation and Populous, they conducted a joint research some years ago where they surveyed 18 to 20-year-old youths across multiple countries in the world who were very active on social media, right? And what they were looking for was cultural flexibility. And they found that African youths who were 18 to 20 years old and very active on social media, right, were the most culturally inflexible youths in the world. When it came to technology behavior and digital behavior, they were at par with their contemporaries across the world. But when it came to embracing certain Western themes that are driving globalization today, they did not actually embrace some of those things. So the interesting data, some of the things that came out was the fact that most African youth still believe that it is not okay to have a child outside wedlock. Now, in the West, that's not a big deal. You can have having a child and being married are 2 separate concepts for the Westerner. But for the African youths, 18 to 20-year-olds, they still don't believe that, and so many other things like that. They still they default back to their cultural beliefs, even though they are technologically active. So myth 1 is being digital does not equate to being Western. Myth 2 is that informal markets in Africa are disorganized. As you know, the informal market in Africa is way bigger than the formal market, right? Yes. Informal trade is way bigger than formal trade. And that tends to give the impression that because they are informal, that means they are disorganized. The reason for that is that the Western orientation equates sophistication with infrastructural development. So, you live in the UK, you go out there, you got the train, you get on TFL, you bring out your Oyster card. Everything is organized. Life is you can organize your life, basically. Everything works on time. I remember my very first time in the UK some years ago, where there was a strike, and we're running late for a meeting, and we called and said we'll be running late. And they asked us to tell them by how many minutes we're going to run late. Of course, I'm like, who knows how many minutes they will run late, In Nigeria, the answer to that is, I will be there soon by God's grace. And everybody moves on, The gentleman refused to leave the phone. I had to tell him. So I had to go to one of those public information pillars and then sort of estimate the time. And then I told him we'll be late by so. And you could almost feel the relief that this guy had getting on the phone. I'm like, really? Now, if you have that kind of Western lesson, you land in an African country and everywhere is disorganized, and there's no infrastructural development, there's no seeming order, you tend to think that means the markets are not sophisticated. It's actually not true. The informal markets in Africa are extremely sophisticated, extremely. They are extremely sophisticated. They have order, they have structure. They have invisible organizations that are built on cultural values like trust, like apprenticeship, like mentoring, that have gone on for decades. Now, business schools like the Harvard Business School are now beginning to study the Igbo apprenticeship system, for instance, where you see the Igbo people, everywhere they go in the world, they systematically, over a period of generations, take over commerce in any region they are, using an apprenticeship model where they bring in someone under them. The guy apprentices over a period of time. And then when they can trust that the person can stand on his own business-wise, they then give that person seed capital, right, to go and start up his own business and all of that. And over a period of time, you then find that you go into the market, it is informal, it is scattered. If someone doesn't take you around, you can get lost. But in that market, behind all of that disorganization, there is a clear structure of hierarchy that is built on trust, is built on respect, is built on apprenticeship. So it's the concept of sophistication exists in African informal markets, but it's not the same. The other myth is that we are individualistic too, just like the West. And it's not true. Part of it is that most of the people that have been, if you've ever been trained in marketing at all, you've been trained as consumers, you've been trained using Maslow's hierarchy of human needs.
Yes.
And you've been told that every consumer in the world is looking for self-actualization. This is not true. First of all, research has shown, Hofstadter research has shown that, research out of Stanford University has shown that actually frameworks like that they only apply to the West, specifically to America, where there's extreme individualism. And because of that, your concern is how to be the best you can be. In Africa, it's not the same. We're not individualistic. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs does not apply in Africa at all. I can defend that scientifically any day of the week. It does not apply. It doesn't apply at all. The average African is seeking to fulfill the role that he is meant to fulfill within the community or within the society that he is from. And that's what defines their ambition. That's what it is. You are not successful in Africa unless your community recognizes you as successful. You're not successful.
Very true.
Unless you also exhibit certain symbols of success that are accepted in the community. I always make jokes like this whole idea of Western billionaires wearing black t-shirt and blue jeans all the time. It's very Western. You can't try that in Africa. If you're a billionaire in Africa, you have to dress like a billionaire. That's the only way we will know you are a billionaire. There's nothing like Warren Buffett living in the same house forever. It's not going to happen here. If you're a billionaire, you live where billionaires live, in the kind of house that they live in. And that has implication on consumption. It has implication on spending. It has implication on social cues that you leverage when you're marketing products. So let me just stop there. But those are like the 3 to 4 top myths that people work with when they want to do anything on the continent.
Fantastic insights. You've mentioned in terms of how informal markets are not disorganized. They are very organized in Africa, and how the African consumer is modernizing and not westernizing. So if you look at things such as technology, where you've emphasized the African consumer is modernizing and not westernizing, what role has technology played in the evolution or changing behaviors of the African consumer?
Oh, that question is lovely. What technology has done really for Africans is that it has helped them to be more African. if that
Interesting.
if that makes sense. It's meant, so for instance, I mean, that technology allows us to disseminate anything. It allows for transfer of information, services, products very rapidly. One of the things that it has done for Africa is that it has amplified our storytelling capabilities. First of all, Africa is a storytelling continent, right?
Yes.
Most of our history is documented in oral forms. It's hardly written down.
True.
Most of the books you will see written on African history are written by Westerners, who came here and lived there and all of that, and then they wrote that, isn't it? So most of our history, most of our culture, most of our stories are oral in nature. With the advent of technology and the rapid adoption of technology on the continent, what that has done is that it has amplified our storytelling capability. We are telling stories across the world. Our stories are traveling across the world. We're jumping on platforms like Netflix, like Amazon, Hulu, HBO, all of those things. They're coming now here to harvest African stories. That's at the most visible level. At the most invisible level is that the most basic forms of technology. Imagine technology like the USSD technology on mobile phones has been used now, leveraged by Africans to facilitate commerce, right, and to facilitate financial transactions. The M-Pesa story in East Africa is a brilliant case study of this. And all of that is what is driving that, even though the technology being used for financial transactions is not as advanced. It's the most basic mobile technology. However, the existing trust in the ecosystem is what is spurring that very minimal technology and making it work. So if I want to transfer money to somebody else, instead of going to a bank and I transfer the money and I trust that the bank is going to deliver the money at the other end. What I do in a rural setting, therefore, is that I send a USSD code to somebody else, and I trust that that person who has enough of our cultural values will then, based on that information, go and deliver the money to whomever I've requested that the money is going to be delivered to, and all of that. And what creators, innovators like that have done is that they've taken the most basic technology that is portable across different socioeconomic class, and they've combined that with the cultural values of the African and created an incredible solution that is tapping to the rural market, tapping to the bottom of the pyramid, tapping into informal market. So technology, what it has done is that it has helped us to express certain aspects of ourselves in terms of entertainment, in terms of culture, in terms of storytelling. But it has also allowed us to now express our commercial behaviors and transactional behaviors, which is built on trust. So that's what I mean when I say technology has helped Africans be more African, if you catch my meaning.
100%. So you mentioned how technology has allowed Africans to become more African and tell our stories. So, social media is a key channel for people to express themselves and tell their stories.
Yeah.
So if we look at that from a social media perspective, what role has social media played in changing the behaviors of the African consumer?
Let me start from the serious to the humorous.
I'm looking forward to this.
On the serious side of things, social media has facilitated movements. Like, for instance, the populism that is going on, the EndSARS movement in places like Nigeria, the Arab Rising in Egypt, and all of that, and in different parts of the continent, is facilitated that. The leaders of movements like that have leveraged social media powerfully to the point that even now government has now, capitulated and begun to leverage social media. A lot of business is being done on social media. I often talk about the Instagram economy, which is unmapped because it is all of the business that's happening. People sell products. Okay, now for instance, if you do business, if you're an SME and your business delivers a turnover below a certain amount, in Nigeria is 25 million naira, you don't have to pay taxes, right? What that means is that if you're not paying taxes, there is no tracking of the volume of business you're doing. And so there are a lot of people on Instagram, on Twitter, who are doing business, who are doing side hustles, and they just say pay directly into my personal account, or they use many of these payment platforms to do that. So there's a massive economy going on there that we're yet to properly map and to put numbers to and sort of describe the architecture of that. So that's something that is huge. It's massive. It's just so important and exciting, especially in a continent that like 70% of the people on the continent are youths. The median age on the African continent is 18 to 20. So that's sort of exciting. On the more humorous side, there's so much the way, Africans have an incredible sense of humor. We can literally joke about everything. And I always say to my Western friends that you guys are too serious. Everything, you can't use bomb in a conversation without being afraid that the CIA will come and arrest you or something. Bomb is a word in the English language. You can use it for anything. You don't have to carry a bomb. You guys are too serious. I always tell them that because Africans process life with humor.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons that we are such a resilient people. Because even when we're going through difficulty, we make jokes about it, we laugh about it. And some of these jokes go on social media. People laugh. There was a time there was fuel scarcity and all of that. And there was this meme that was going around that I used to crack up with every time. If you've seen this movie Taken by Liam Neeson,
yes.
There's this line there where he picks the phone and he tells them, I'm coming to get you and all of that. So they did a meme of this scene. And of course, Liam Neeson is saying, I'm coming to get you. And then the Nigerians commented, which fuel? And that was their way of making fun of the fuel crisis. That, look, guy, nobody asked for it. You can't get anybody. Just let this thing go. And all of that, and you see, it was a painful period economically for people. People struggled to go to work. Businesses lost income. But the people found a way to make comedy out of it. And that's that resilient spirit, social media allows it to be expressed very significantly. With the other thing it has done, still on the same vein, but with a serious angle to it, is that now we have seen the rise of a new crop of influencers who are social media comedians. The typical path of a comedian prior to social media is that you get gigs, you get smaller gigs at events, and then over time, you gain enough popularity, and then eventually you headline your own show. That's how it works. But with social media, there are comedians that have risen to prominence. Some of them have become leaders of protest movements. They become actors in the film industry and all of that. And they started off by doing comedy skits on social media. That's all.
Yes.
And they did enough of that to the point that it's redefined the comedy industry, it's redefined the entertainment industry. And you see that today, according to data, you see that the average African today spends a cumulative of about 4 to 5 hours consuming video content on social media in a 24-hour day, cumulatively. When they are in traffic and they are stuck, they go on Twitter to look for something to laugh at. They go on Instagram to look for something to laugh at, because you're stuck in a 2-hour traffic in a yellow bus. There's no AC. You're sweating like a pig. You have two choices. Either you get angry at the government and write a long diatribe online, or you go and laugh online, and people choose to laugh. Very true. You understand? Because that's who we are, and that's how they keep going, and that's how they survive. So those are some of my favorite points to bring out on how social media has really affected us as African consumers here.
Brilliant. So you talked about the size of the social media business economy, and the way the African consumer may use, say, social media for business, political and entertainment purposes. I was wondering if we can come back closer to home, back to yourself. You know, a big part of your work is consulting for multinationals and indigenous businesses on how to win the African marketplace. Imagine I'm one of your clients.
Yeah.
What top tips or future type of insights would you give me to enable me to win in the African marketplace?
I would say to you that you definitely, obviously, you need to use digital and leverage it, but you need to use it in unusual ways, and that you need to use storytelling and humor a lot in engaging your consumers. Africans are a storytelling people. Even if you want to talk about the attributes of your products, which you should, it is better if you use stories to do that than if you use science to do it. We're not a scientific people. We're storytelling people. We're more anecdotal in nature. And also, I would say use humor, but use humor cleverly.
Yes.
Don't use slapstick humor. I find that African humor is very close to British wit,
Yes.
in a sense, not the American type of the American type of humor, which is more apparent and slapstick.
I agree.
But the British wit that you have to be a bit intelligent to get the joke, that kind of thing. To use those two things would be critical. I would also say that respect the fact that there are hierarchies in society. Society is organized around hierarchies and influence. We still run with a tribal mentality, and so using tribal influencers within the target communities you're going after, not necessarily the typical influencers, the macro influencers, but using micro or even nano influencers who have small tribes that gather around them and they can shape and influence the behavior of those small tribes will be very critical to consider in whatever you're doing on the continent.
Fantastic. You've given some top tips of how to win in the African marketplace, say in the future. So, sticking to that theme in terms of the future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from, say, a African consumer perspective? What would have evolved or, say, changed with regards to the behaviors or how a company or person should approach the African consumer to penetrate and increase their business?
I think one of the things I see is that there's going to be much greater prominence of homegrown brands, much greater prominence of African brands. It doesn't even matter whether those brands are built by Africans or they are built by multinational companies who develop those brands here. So I talked earlier about the Hero brand.
Yes.
Hero is a brand that is a local brand. It's a very strong local brand, but it was conceptualized and created by a multinational company. You understand? And the reason is that Africans will gravitate. They're going deeper and deeper and embracing more and more their cultural identity. And as such, brands and businesses that leverage that is going to be big. In the next 5 years. That's really what I see. The Chinese are already experimenting with that. They're coming here and creating products that don't even exist in China, and making them big on the continent. And they're positioning those products to be products for the African continent. And so far, it's working, so to speak. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I actually look forward to that. And I am seeing that trend in terms of homegrown and African brands, which is something that's really good to see. So if we look closer to home in terms of yourself, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? What will you be doing to advance and progress some of the fantastic work you've already delivered so far?
I'll be doing what I'm doing now on a much bigger scale. We so far we've worked for clients across 3 regions in Africa: Southern Africa, West Africa, obviously, and East Africa. And in 5 years' time, where I see myself is doing more of that on a much larger scale, hopefully having regional offices by then, so that we can be closer to clients in those regions and all of that. And so it will be exciting 5 years from now to do more, to be doing more and more of that on a much bigger scale, and potentially even influence policy shaping on the continent in terms of trade and commerce across the continent.
Amazing. And hopefully by then you've published probably 3, 4, 5 more books.
I hope so. It's a lot of work writing one book.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or even affirmations that keep us going when times are good or hard. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Oh, yes. My favorite one says that let my enemy live long and see what I will be in the future. And the reason I like that one is it just hammers on something that is very African. You know, the belief in the value of an enemy. And that an enemy is basically in this sense are not people trying to kill you. It's more like naysayers and doubters. And the African desire to say, I don't want these people to go away. They are actually my motivation. I want them to be there, you know, and when I succeed, I want them to come back and say, we thought you couldn't do it, but you did it. And so we have that proverb in Africa that says, let my enemies live long and see what I will become in the future.
Fantastic. I like that one. Thank you for sharing that, Feyi. So as we're coming to the end of our conversation, do you have any closing remarks and final calls to action for people who are interested in entering the African market? They want to know a bit more about who and what are the behaviours of the African consumer. Any final words, calls to action?
I'd say if you have any interest whatsoever in Africa and doing business in Africa, either as an African living there, or an African in diaspora, or even a multinational business, Westerner. A starting point for you will be to, get a copy of my book, The Villager How Africans Consume Brands. It's available on Amazon. Get a copy, read through it. It gives you some quick tips and insights that you can immediately begin to use in your planning processes and all of that. And it also gives you some confidence that building an Africa strategy to the market is going to work. And obviously, if you'd like to discuss further, I'm easy to reach as well. But that would be my recommendation as a starting point.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Feyi. That has been an amazing conversation. First class insights from a first class guest. So thank you for your time. It's been value on value. I've very much enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you very much, Tessa.
So yeah, thank you for your time. And I'm sure we'll be in contact very soon. And I look forward to further conversations and collaborations.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.